This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, and you're listening to Python's Paradise, your film and music show. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, a.k.a. the Python Hyena. And folks, we all remember that great, awesome black and white comedy from the 50s, from 1951 to 1957. It inspired us all to laugh. We're talking about I Love Lucy. And over the years, I've come to love Lucy, and we all loved Lucille Ball. And the guest I have on the phone is an expert on I Love Lucy and Lucille Ball. We have the awesome Geoffrey Mark. How you do, Geoffrey?
I must tell you and your listeners that I am pleased as punch. First of all, to be on the air in Canada, and second of all, this is your 100th episode. I am so excited.
This is my 100th episode. Yes, I've done one. Since April of 2015, I have done 100 interviews, and this is pretty spectacular. I can't. If somebody told me 5 years ago I was going to be doing this, I would have said, "Look, stop dreaming." But here I am, and being able to sit on here and talk about such a legend in the profession like Lucille Ball.
Well, she is the best, most loved, most successful television performer that ever has been and ever will be. So, of course, for your 100th, we're talking about the best.
Yes, and she also had the best wine out of everybody.
Yes. The grape stomping episode. That one is if you go to fans, I've spoken all over the world about the show and her other shows. And I start off by saying, okay, what's your favorite episode? You don't even have to introduce the idea. And you get shouted out like a dozen different titles of shows. That's how familiar people are with the body of her work. And the grape stomping episode, Vitamita Vegemin, and the Candy Factory. Those are the three that everybody remembers and everybody wants to talk about. So you've got good taste, sir.
Yeah, I gotta ask just on the side. I'm a big fan of Weird Al Yankovic, and I gotta say, on his very, very, very first album, which I think came out in 1982, he did a parody of the Tony Basil song.
Hey Mickey, you're making it Hey Ricky.
He did Ricky, yeah. What did you hear that? And if you did, what did you think?
Of course I heard it. I put it, well, first of all, Al is a brilliant satirist.
Yep.
And he uses music brilliantly. So kudos to him for taking a song that at the time was a big pop hit. Mm-hmm. If you're old enough to remember back then. I remember dancing to it.
Oh, Tony Basil, I remember her in that lovely video where she had the cheerleader's outfit on. I can't forget that.
Oh, yeah. She was the inspiration for quite a few young men's daydreams and evening dreams, too.
Yep.
She was a wonderful, wonderful choreographer and dancer. And she made this kind of lightweight pop song into a big hit video. And then Al had the wonderful idea to turn it into a parody of I Love Lucy. And it worked beautifully, just like a few years earlier when disco was the big fashion. They did a disco version of the I Love Lucy theme song, and it became a great big hit. So I think almost any time you bring Lucille Ball into anything, you have a big hit on your hands. Like the 100th episode today.
Yeah. Did Lucille Ball hear the Weird Al song?
Oh, yes.
Did she like it?
And she appreciated it. She appreciated, as did Mr. Arnaz, how much people loved their work and how much it was revered. They never started out to become legends. They never started out thinking, we're making this show that's going to live forever. They worked very, very hard to produce a very high-quality product, much higher quality than anything else that was on at the time. And I know Desi Jr. has told me that if his parents could speak today, probably one of the first things they would say is, thank you for loving us so much, and thank you for getting it and appreciating it. So yes, all of that kind of thing that was any kind of a tribute, both Miss Ball and Mr. Arnaz really appreciated.
Yeah, you're a big affiliation with this. Now, I got listed down here. The I Love Lucy premiered on October 15th, 1951, which was way ahead of my time. And
mine.
yeah, and it ran till May 6th, 1957, also ahead of my time. But obviously you knew Lucille Ball in person now. How did you come, first off, how did you become a fan of the show? And then how did you become affiliated with her personally?
Well, the answer to the first one is kind of simple. I was alive. I'm a child of the late 1950s, and Lucille Ball's television programs were on morning, noon, and night. You couldn't escape them if you wanted to. She had a Monday evening show for 23 years, the reruns of which were also put on during the day. I Love Lucy was the best of her series. The I Love Lucy went for 3 seasons into an hour-long format in the late 50s. So there's 180 episodes of I Love Lucy and then 13 more hour-long shows. And then Mr. Arnaz and Miss Ball played those characters on other shows as well. They were the biggest hit in the world. Lucille Ball's face, her visage, has been seen by more people on this planet than anyone else's face in history. So you really, those of us who are baby boomers, she was inescapable, and she was the best at what she did. So like every other child, I loved Lucille Ball. I loved I Love Lucy. I loved The Lucy Show. I loved Here's Lucy. So as I grew into a person and went into show business, I spent my free time, doing research because I wanted to understand why it was so good, because I wanted to be good. I saw that she was excellent. I wanted to be excellent, so I wanted to learn. And later in my career, I had a big hit book about Ella Fitzgerald, and that led to another book. The publisher wanted, okay, this was wonderful. You got a Grammy Award. Let's move on to the next thing. And the next thing I wanted was to write about Miss Ball, not personally, not her life story. That had been done badly, over and over and over again, inaccurately and salaciously. And I really wanted no part of that. I wanted to talk about the work. And there really had not been a book written about the totality of her work. Everything on television, from live TV before I Love Lucy till she died, till the day she died. And I did my research, and that's a lot of television shows to watch. And I interviewed over 1,000 people, and bless their hearts, the Arnaz family got behind the book because they wanted something like that out there. They wanted the people to really know about the work. So Lucy Arnaz and Desi Jr. cooperated with me. Steve Allen wrote a foreword for it. Milton Berle wrote a blurb for the back cover. And the over 1,000 people I spoke with who had done her makeup, done her hair, designed her costumes, written her shows, directed them, produced them, were guest stars on her shows. And I got to interview Miss Ball once.
Oh.
And all of that became the basis of the Lucy book. Let's use the name of the book, The Lucy Book. And those of you who are fans of Lucille Ball, and I'm still getting fan mail about this book, we're in negotiations to do a new, much expanded, enlarged version of it for 2018. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Oh, you mean like a movie?
No. Just the book that's already been written, but twice as large.
Oh, okay. Well, that is exciting.
I also did on television Inside Television's greatest, I Love Lucy, for the Learning Channel. And that got the biggest ratings of any show on TLC up to that point. We were thrilled that Barbra Streisand's people called in and asked for a copy of it. So I've also done it for television. And again, the Arnaz family cooperated. They have been very, very good to me. I've always tried to be honest about the work and not. I don't mind talking with you about Miss Ball's personal life if you have questions.
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about what I write about and what I do professionally with Miss Ball, with Mr. Arnaz, it is about the work.
Yeah, I gotta know, when you first, was the first time you met her when you interviewed her?
Yes.
Were you at all nervous? Like, what was going through your mind when you found out you were going to meet her?
I was hyperventilating, literally hyperventilating. It was an unusual situation. And again, I'm always honest. I don't say things that aren't so. Miss Ball was doing a seminar in New York for what was then called the Museum of Broadcasting. It's now called the Paley Center. And I was a charter member, and only so many people could buy tickets to this thing. Miss Ball was not going to give a speech or have a program. She was just going to take questions. And people were asking things like, who was your favorite character other than Fred and Ethel? Was it Little Ricky? Was it Mrs. Trumbull? And Miss Ball was getting a little discouraged that no one was really talking about her work. And it came time for they allowed me to ask a question. And I said, your good friend Jack Benny, as that got her attention, said that the reason people tune in to watch sitcoms is there are pieces of shtick that happen not every single week, but people tune in to see, oh, is she going to do that this week, or is he going to do that thing he did 3 weeks ago again? And I said to her, there are two that you used to do that you've stopped doing. And I used code words from the script, but for your audience's sake. One is the crying jag, where she goes, wah!
Yeah.
And the other was a noise she made when she got caught doing something naughty. And it was this strange sort of sound. And I said to her, you stopped using them after a while. Why did you choose to stop using your trademarks? And she looked at me for a second and she said, young man, that is the most intelligent question ever asked about my comedy before.
Oh, congratulations.
Said, yeah, that thrilled me to no end. For the next 20 minutes, she allowed me to ask question after question after question. Happily, luckily, a friend came with me and had the presence of mind to pull out a pad he had with him and wrote down every word. So I had a record of it. And that interview is interspersed throughout the book where it's appropriate to the shows we're talking about. It was not the first celebrity I'd ever met. I've been in show business since I'm 15 years old. But to meet an icon like that, to see her in person, and to see how intelligent she was, how charming she was, what a commanding stage presence she had, and her reaction to the audience was fascinating to me because she didn't suffer fools gladly. And the people who asked foolish questions were treated like people who asked foolish questions. And they got very short responses. And the people who asked sincere questions got wonderful answers. And she talked about Mr. Arnaz, about her children, about her mother, about Bill Frawley and Vivian Vance and Gail Gordon. And I thought her answers were honest to the point. And obviously there's no cue cards, there's no script, there's no teleprompter. She is talking from the top of her head. And it really did show that she was a very intelligent woman who knew what she was talking about, was happy to be there, but for goodness sakes, if you're a dope, shut up.
Wow. Oh man, that must have been something. You
It was.
And that was as close as you got to her personally, huh?
To her personally. Happily and luckily, both of her children had given me just hours and hours and hours and hours of their time. To this day, they remain in my life and have been wonderful to me. They have given me access to information and videos and other people that nobody else has been given. And I'm enormously grateful to Lucy Arnaz and to Desi Arnaz Jr. and to Larry Luckenbill, Lucy's husband. And unfortunately, Desi lost his wife about a year and a half ago to brain cancer, and she was a lovely woman. The family has been very good to me. So I consider myself to be a hardworking, talented man who's been very lucky.
And you know your subject matter too, so that must have came across really well when you met her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it comes across. It's been one of the hallmarks of my career. The first time I met Milton Berle, I was taken to the Friars Club in Beverly Hills, where I eventually became a member. But I was taken by Jack Carter, may he rest in peace, a wonderful, well-known American stand-up comedian, a huge Las Vegas star. And Mr. Berle loved show business. He loved show business history. He lived it. He breathed it. He ate it. And we were having lunch together to talk about Miss Ball. And I began talking about his career and individual television shows he'd done in the late 40s. And he stopped me and he said, "How do you know all of this?" And I said, "It's my job to know all of this." And he pointed his very large finger at me and he said, "Okay, young man, you know things. Now I'm going to tell you some real stories." And I've had that response from almost everybody I've met in show business. The real ones, the ones who had real talent and loved their work. When they knew that you knew about it, that you were show-wise and knew your background and weren't going to ask them ridiculous questions, they opened up to me like a floodgate.
Wow.
May I give you another example?
Sure.
It's a little petty, but maybe there are some hairdressers listening. I interviewed Irma Krusli, who was the woman who did Miss Ball's hair from about 1955 until she died.
Okay.
And most of Miss Ball's hair, most of it, in the later years, were all wigs. And I asked Irma, on any of the shows that you did with Miss Ball, did she ever stop while a filming was going on and call for you to fix her hair in the middle of a scene? And she thought for a minute, and she said, only once. She was in a costume, and she stopped the filming, and she said, "Irma, I need my bangs back." And I said, when she was in the penguin costume.
Okay.
And her mouth fell open. She said, "How could you possibly know that?" I said, because it's the only episode where her hair just suddenly changes in the middle of a scene. And she said, "My God, everybody who comes to my house to ask me questions, I can hand them a tape with the answers. I know the questions they're already going to ask." She says, "You really know my work. Now I'm going to tell you some real stuff." And I got a wonderful interview from her for the book and on camera for my documentary.
Wow. Yeah, I noticed you had the documentary. What was that like to shoot?
It was an awful lot of fun. This is one of those things that fell into my lap. A production company who will remain nameless was doing this show about I Love Lucy. And this was in the early 2000s. And I got a phone call one day from a man named Rob Corsini, a lovely man, who said, "Hey, I'm Rob Corsini. We're producing this show. We're basing it on your book, but we're having some troubles. Would you mind coming into the office and talking with us?" And I said, "Sure." So I went in and I said, "What's the trouble?" He said, "Well, we can't get anybody to talk to us. The Arnaz family won't speak to us. Everybody who knows the Arnaz family won't speak to us. We can't get the rights to any video. We're dead in the water here." I said, "Well, why haven't you spoken to Miss Arnaz?" He said, "We have. She's turned us down." I said, "Really? Can I use your phone?" So I called Lucy. She was living in New York at the time. And I said, "Lucy, I'm in the office here, and they tell me you turned them down." She said, "Yeah, everybody always does a butcher job about my parents. I don't want another butcher job." I said, "Well, they're asking me to get involved." She said, "Really? and what are you going to be? And I turned to him and I said, what am I going to be? And he said, you're going to be the writer. And I turned to her and said, I'm going to be the writer. And she said, really? And who's going to be the producer? And I turned to Rob Corsini and I said, and who's going to be the producer? And he said, you are. So I said to her, I am. She said, okay, if you're writing and producing it. And then she opened everything up to me, and there was no problem. And I had a ball and a half, really going back to the people I loved and being able to interview them on camera. And it was a joy, a joy. We could have done 4 hours of the stuff we had. We had to whittle it down to an hour for TLC's time slot. But it did really, really well. And it's been released on DVD, and I'm very proud of it.
Is it released uncut on DVD?
No. I wish they would. When I say producer, I don't own it. Producer means I made it happen. I made decisions along with Rob Corsini, who was the co-producer, but I don't own it. I don't distribute it. I can just tell you that it is available on DVD, but unfortunately, not only did they not release everything, they threw out all of the interviews to make space for other stuff. So there's 100 hours of interviews with show business legends that ended up, being tossed in an ash can because they didn't have room to store it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is before things became digital.
Yeah.
And, oh well.
And you're also the director of that, too, I noticed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I took over the whole thing with Rob. I don't want to claim only credit. Rob Corsini and I did the whole thing. I was new to producing television and writing it, so he taught me how. And but I was the face of it. I was the one who interviewed all the celebrities, and pretty much I wrote the script and pretty much sat with the editor and edited it together with Rob's supervision and know-how. And it was like going to school. It was like going to college. I got a degree in producing documentaries for television and continued to do so after that.
Wow. That must have been quite you wrote the book, and the book got great reviews on Amazon. I was on Amazon, I looked at that, and you got some great reviews on there. But to bring that visually on the screen through all these interviews and to bring that up in a documentary style, that must have been a challenge. But I would imagine, because you got involved, that increased the confidence of everybody that came forward and spoke.
I could be a shrinking violet and go, oh gosh, or I could just be honest with you and say, yeah, my being attached got better people, got better interviews, made a better program because my name was attached to it. But I wasn't. There were editors involved and cameramen involved, and there's anytime you produce a show like that, there's all kinds of people who also have to be very good at what they do to make a great show. So it was not the Geoffrey Mark show. It was Inside Television's greatest I Love Lucy, and everybody who worked on it, I think, truly did an excellent job and did their best and were total professionals. And again, it was a joy for me to be able to bring that story to the screen. Probably today, I would have insisted on 2 hours. I was a little younger then, 15, 16, 17 years ago. Today, I would have said, no, this can't be told in an hour. And but we did what we did. The hardest thing was what to leave out, because we had an abundance of wonderful things. I called Bob Hope's daughter, Linda Hope, and I said, Linda, I need footage of Lucille and Bob together on television. She sent me like 6 hours of video to use.
Man.
Everybody cooperated.
Yeah, and that's always a great thing when somebody can be trusted to handle the legacy of another performer. And wow, Bob Hope. Yeah, I gotta ask, of all the 6 seasons of I Love Lucy, that initial run, do you have a favorite episode?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not the one people usually think. I do get asked this question a lot.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful question, and I like it because my answer is never what people think. having seen all 180 episodes, and I'm not exaggerating, 100 times each, maybe more, I have almost all of them memorized word for word. That's how much I've seen them. There's one episode where I think from the very first second the episode starts till it stops, there isn't a bad joke, there isn't a hesitation of comic timing, there isn't a moment where they're having to tell you a bunch of stuff so you understand the joke's coming up. Every moment you're watching the show is just funny, 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 funny. And the episode is called Lucy's Showbiz Swan Song. It was one of the episodes they shot while she was pregnant with Desi Jr., little rookie on the show. Mm-hmm. And it's about her trying to get into the act while she is large with child, and the machinations she goes through to try and hide her pregnancy while she's trying to convince Ricky to let her be on the show. And then finally at the end, she cancels out a performer so that she can take this person's place, and it's just hysterically funny. It's the episode where they sing Sweet Adeline. And those of you who know the show know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who don't know it, look it up in my book or just watch the episode, because you will see. I really think as a whole, it is the best episode. Now, there were specific episodes where Miss Ball was funnier, like Vitamin Vegemin, the episode where she's trying to do a television commercial, and she's taking this tonic called Vitamin Vegemin, which was a satire on Geritol, which was an American tonic they had in Canada too, that had a huge alcohol content. Okay. And if you drank enough of it, you got drunk. So they parodied it, and Miss Ball plays herself, plays Lucy Ricardo, who is rehearsing a television commercial over and over and over again, trying to get it right, and she's taking spoonsful of this tonic that's like 28% alcohol and proceeds to get drunk in front of your eyes. I think that's the best thing she ever did. But as an episode, I like the other one better.
Okay, that's an interesting cross-reference there. I got to say, too, with Lucy, it's always a gem to find, because with comedy, there's a lot of great male physical comedians, but it's always wonderful when there are female physical comedians as well. Of course, Lucille Ball, right there at the top of the list, could definitely do physical comedy, and I think she, of course, opened that door for a lot of the female comedians to come, although none have quite struck the match the way she did.
Well, there are reasons for that. Miss Ball almost always retained her femininity while she was being funny. There were a lot of comedians, Joan Davis is one of them, who tried to imitate Miss Ball. Someone I knew, Martha Raye. But when Martha Raye was being funny, she wasn't being feminine. And sometimes she was very, very naughty in her humor. Miss Ball was never off color. Miss Ball there was always a lady there, no matter how physical her comedy became. There are other women on television who, took from the same well. Carol Burnett, certainly. Mary Tyler Moore did it well. Barbara Eden could do physical comedy. Roseanne Barr sometimes could do it.
Lily
Penny
Tomlin
Marshall did it pretty well on Laverne and Shirley. But
I was going to say Lily Tomlin.
Who's the name you were going to mention?
Lily Tomlin.
Lily Tomlin, I don't know if you call what she does physical comedy. She's such a genius of what she does, and her partner Jane Wagner is such a genius for writing the material. She creates characters, and some of them are physical, and some of them are more voice and inflection and facial expression, where Miss Ball could take props, could make a cello funny, could take wrapping candies and dipping them in chocolate funny. It had nothing to do with the character, really. It had to do with what she was physically doing. getting on a pair of stilts to get into an upper berth, getting caught in a shower while the water is rising above her, getting caught on a raft shooting down the Colorado Rapids. These are some of the later shows she did after I Love Lucy. But I don't know that I can point to one person who did so much physically as Miss Ball did, and did it so well.
Yeah, and of course, I love slapstick humor. I've always loved slapstick humor, and I used to watch even stuff on Nickelodeon. I would watch, and I often say too, I like messy slapstick humor too. And one of my favorite jokes growing up was always the pie in the face, and of course, Lucille Ball definitely had done that as well.
Well, do you know what Miss Ball's first piece of slapstick was?
What was it? I'm interested to know.
Since you are a boy, because this is a boy thing, not a girl thing. Her first slapstick was in 1934. Early in their career, she was a guest star on a Three Stooges short, and she got slapped in the kisser with seltzer by Curly.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that because I had Curly's grandson on here back in January.
He's very nice.
He's very funny too. Yep.
Yeah, and looks just like him. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, of course, genetics.
Yeah.
But that's Miss Ball's first exposure to that kind of thing was working with the Three Stooges. And even her first movie had her face in the mud because they were looking for one of the Goldwyn girls. That's what she was when she first came to Hollywood, a Goldwyn. Sam Goldwyn made independent film productions. He didn't make many of them, but he bankrolled them all himself. No banks, no other people, his own money. And like Ziegfeld had Ziegfeld girls on Broadway, he had Goldwyn girls. And Miss Ball was brought to Hollywood from New York to be one of those. And they asked, would one of you do a bit? And the girls didn't want to look unattractive. They didn't want to look messy. And Miss Ball said, you bet I'll do it. She would try anything to get more time on film, to encourage her career, to learn a new skill, or to use a skill she'd already learned. She was willing. She was a very ambitious woman. And it worked for her. That and being an incredible beauty. I was once talking with Steve Allen about Miss Ball and women in general. And he said, you know, most women over the age of 50, between the wigs and the makeup and the facelifts, they all begin to look like a drag queen a little bit. They cling so hard to a specific moment in time where they thought they looked their best and try to look like that again.
Yeah.
We were talking about Miss Ball's wigs and her makeup and how she looked through the years. He said, well, I knew her in the 40s before I Love Lucy. And he said, not only was she the great beauty of our time, he said, I think she was one of the great beauties of all time. Without makeup, without glamour, just Miss Ball, her hair simply done, going to dinner someplace, off screen. He said she was devastatingly beautiful. Incredible big blue eyes, a little button nose, a beautiful smile, a long, lanky figure. She was all legs, but charm and femininity. He said she really, of all the women he met, other than his wife, Jane Meadows, she stood out to him as one of the classic beauties. And that's a very rare match to get someone that beautiful with that much grace who can do slapstick, because you cannot be uncoordinated or I'm looking for a good word besides uncoordinated. Someone who's a klutz. You can't be a klutz and do physical comedy. You have to really know your body and know how to work with props and know how to take a fall. And she learned all these things because she had the talent and because she had the ambition to learn. Miss Ball was an incredibly hard-working person. None of this was easy. None of this was simple. She worked her beautiful behind off to make sure that everything she did was excellent.
Yeah,
she didn't.
No, go ahead.
She
go
didn't
ahead.
stand for anything less than excellence in herself or the people around her.
Yes, and I know we do a thing here every summer here since 2003 called the Under the Stars Classic Film Series, where people will it's free of charge. People go down, there's food, and they'll watch a movie out on this big screen out there under the stars. And one year they put on Yours, Mine, and Ours, where she worked with Henry Fonda. I did not look at her movie credits. I know she did a lot of television. How many? Do you know offhand how many movies that she had done?
I can tell you that she did 72 movies before I Love Lucy.
Oh.
Miss Ball started in films. She came to Hollywood in 32. Her first films were shown in theaters in 33. And by the late 30s, she wasn't a megastar or a legend, but there were already films Lucille Ball in. They were not the best movies in the whole world, but she was in them. She was in a couple of Fred Astaire and Rogers movies, and then they began building films around her. She and Henry Fonda, again, did a wonderful melodrama called The Big Street. It was one of the Damon Runyon stories. And that really brought her attention, wow, this woman, besides being beautiful, is really talented. So MGM signed her, and they decided to turn her into a redhead because they were going to make a Technicolor film with her called "If Barry Was a Lady." It was a movie version of an Ethel Merman musical, music by Cole Porter. And they turned her head into this beautiful Irish red hair, and that became her trademark. It got lightened up to a strawberry blonde a little bit later. Originally, it was a deep red, but she did for MGM one big hit movie after another, but they didn't quite know what to do with her. Nobody really associated Miss Ball with being a comedian. They associated her with being an actress who was beautiful, who was glamorous, who could wear clothes incredibly well. And she didn't quite fit the mold. So MGM eventually let her go, and she spent the late 40s doing one-hit film after another for different studios. Did 2 films with Bob Hope that were huge hits, and had concurrently a huge radio career. Before there was television, there was radio, and she was a guest on every major radio show. And then starting in 1947, she had her own hit sitcom called My Favorite Husband. And it was that CBS wanted to turn into a television series. And Miss Ball wasn't all that thrilled about it. She was making huge money as a movie star, and Mr. Arnaz, to whom she was married in real life, was making huge money as a band leader all over the country. The television series was simply to get them both in the same place at the same time because they hardly saw each other. She was in a sound stage. Folks, when you're making movies, you're there at 5 o'clock in the morning getting made up and all that jazz. He was coming home 5 o'clock in the morning from working in nightclubs and theaters. They wanted a life. They'd been married 11 years. So they turned the radio show into a TV show just to be together. And really, absolutely no one involved had any idea the enormous thing that about 100 extraordinarily talented people would put together to become I Love Lucy. I don't know why it is written, and it's just not true, that her movie career was over, that she was the queen of the B movie, she never made good films. That's just not true. Before I Love Lucy started, Lucille Ball was as big a movie star as just about anyone you could name today. She made at least 2 or 3 films a year and top billed, and they were, for the most part, when she got past the 1930s, big hit, wonderful films where she really did well. This is all done just to have a home life. And no one dreamed that it would take off the way it did and make her and Mr. Arnaz into even larger stars than they had been before.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking
it was
here.
All just fate. There's no other word for it.
Yeah, it's kind of looking here on Wikipedia. A lot of the early stuff she did, she was uncredited for. And then in the 40s, she started getting in some movies where she was given credit. Also knows, Abbott and Costello in Hollywood. She plays herself, so she got to work with them.
Yeah, that was a guest star appearance.
Yeah.
But by the late 1930s, there were already movies Lucille Ball in. The uncredited things were in the earlier 30s when she was a Goldwyn girl, and then when RKO bought her, because back then they owned you. The studios owned you. They paid you a weekly salary, and you were in the films they told you to be in. She didn't mind. She was learning her craft. She was learning about lighting. She was learning about hitting her mark. She was learning about what hairstyles look good on her and what makeup looked right and how to not look in the camera and how to play a different kind of girl from movie to movie. To her, it was like going to school, and literally with every succeeding film she did, her parts got bigger and bigger, and then she eventually got credited maybe 15 people down the list, but her name was there, and every film her name rose and rose and rose until eventually she was one of the stars of the film.
Did she have any favorite films that she had done?
The Big Street that I told you about was a big favorite for her. She really felt she shined in that. The Long, Long Trailer was a Technicolor movie she made, directed by Vincent Minnelli.
Okay, yep.
With Desi. She loved making that. She did a film with Bob Hope called, oh golly. Every once in a while, folks, when you're 50 years old, every once in a while, a name pops out of your head. The Facts of Life.
Okay.
About two married people who decide to have an affair. It was probably the most adult thing she'd done at that time. It was a comedy with Bob Hope. She loved making that. She loved Yours, Mine, and Ours, and she really loved making Mame.
Yep.
Those are her favorite films.
Her and Bob Hope. I haven't seen The Facts of Life, but her and Bob Hope. That's got to be a winner with those two comic minds come together. Bob Hope definitely funny.
And they worked differently, but they worked very well together because Bob needed, because of the characters he played, he needed women who were very feminine, very pretty, who could play the broad comedy he did, but could also act, because Mr. Hope could act. And when he got scripts that gave him the chance to not only be funny but play a character, he was excellent. And the two of them did 4 films together, and each of them was really good. And then in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, Lucille was a constant guest on Mr. Hope's variety programs. He did 2 of her sitcoms, but she was on his show constantly. There were some years in the early 80s where that was the only shows she did, was being on the Bob Hope specials. She adored him. They were very, very good friends. Desi Arnaz had been the band leader on Bob Hope's radio show for 2 seasons, so Bob knew Mr. Arnaz very well. And then when the Arnazes got divorced and Lucille married Gary Morton, Gary was a huge golf pro. Not a pro, but a golf nut. Bob Hope loved golf, so they played golf together. So there was a real personal friendship there, above and beyond their working relationship.
Now, you mentioned the film The Big Street. Now, I have not seen that. Now, that was with her and Henry Fonda, right?
Miss Ball, Henry Fonda, Agnes Moorehead.
Okay, yeah.
It's a big-time people here. The Damon Runyon stories, for those of you who are unfamiliar with them, Mr. Runyon wrote in a very specific style. All of his stories dealt with people who were slightly part of the underworld, or at least the fictionalized underworld, that lived around the Broadway area in New York. So lots of stories about shenanigans, mobsters paying money to produce shows for their girlfriends, leading ladies cozying up to mobsters, people going from crime into show business. And they all spoke in a kind of Brooklynese sort of, there was a real style to the dialogue. And there are several stories of his that were made into films. In fact, Miss Ball was in another one with Bob Hope called Sorrowful Jones. That was a Damon Runyon story. This one was about a chorus girl who'd become an actress, and there is this poor schnook of a waiter, played by Henry Fonda, who is madly in love with her. She does not know he exists. And she has an accident and becomes crippled. And he takes it upon himself to take care of her and rehabilitate her and get her back in money and back with her show people, even though she couldn't walk. And then finally gives her the strength to walk in front of everyone. And she dies in his arms, happy that she was able to one more time be the center of glamorous attention, and then dies in his arms. The story may sound very hokey or very soap opera-ish, but it's brilliant because the source material was brilliant. And Mr. Fonda was playing against type, and so is Lucille Ball. This is a part that could have been played by Bette Davis or Joan Crawford or any number of women known for playing hard-boiled, bitchy characters. Miss Ball was not known for that, and she really surprised people by the performance she gave.
And you mentioned the facts of life about the married couple having an affair. Now, was that an issue with the Hays Code at the time? Because I understand the Hays Code was a lot of trouble back then.
There was no Hays office by this point. This is 1960.
Oh,
This
okay.
is right when films started becoming slightly more adult.
Okay.
Films always dealt with infidelity. I mean, that was going back to silent films. You could have it as a topic. It couldn't be glamorized, and you obviously couldn't show sex. In this film, the writing makes it so that these two people never, ever really get a chance to be totally alone together. That's part of the plot. Part of the humor is that every effort at consummating the affair doesn't quite happen. They kiss, they embrace, but that's as far as they get. So there was no problem. Miss Ball would not have done anything that anyone would have thought of as dirty. She just wouldn't do that kind of material. And I don't think Mr. Hope would either. Maybe in a comedy sketch later in his life, but in a film where he's playing a real character, I don't think he would have gone there. They both had impeccable taste, good taste, and it shows. That's why the film works so well. Had there been two other people, again, known for playing these kinds of characters, had it been Joan Crawford and Franchot Tone, or Walter Pidgeon and Hedy Lamarr, it wouldn't have worked because you'd expect that from them. Why this worked was that these were two fairly happily married people who fell in love. And their warmth, the realism and honesty they're able to give the characters, I think erased anything there that might have been thought of as dirty.
Yeah, and
Is that a good answer?
Yeah, yep. And you mentioned, of course.
I talk a lot. You got to stop me sometimes.
No. I actually I prefer that you talk. Trust me, people want to hear you, not me. I'm just kind of circling some questions and whatnot, and I'm gonna go back to I Love Lucy, but I'm just kind of because most of us know.
I have a question for you, sir.
Sure.
Is this show ever edited if I say the wrong thing?
Generally, I'll do an edit if somebody requests me to do an edit. But generally, I keep everything in. But if somebody, like for example, I had somebody that was doing a little music on here back in January. Steve Joyner had sent me, and he thought he was a little off in his playing. He asked if I'd edit that out, and I said, sure, of course I would. I never want anybody to be dissatisfied with
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking you about editing is this is, I think, a little known fact about how Miss Ball worked on I Love Lucy. In her later shows, they used cue cards. In her later shows, there were mistakes, and unless they were hysterically funny, scenes were reshot, and things were fixed, so they had a perfect show. But originally, on I Love Lucy, Miss Ball wanted it to be as close to the audience seeing like a live play in a theater. So she was very insistent that the show, from start to finish, unless there was some tremendous special effect being done, the half-hour show was filmed in about 90 minutes, even with costume changes and makeup changes and set changes. They ran through it so that the audience in the studio wouldn't get cold, and they'd have the best real live reactions for the folks at home. And there are mistakes in I Love Lucy that they just talk through. People mess up their lines and repeat them, or one of the other characters will joke with them about saying the wrong thing and say the right thing, or a prop doesn't work quite properly, and they use it. They just keep going and use it. That's also very, very unusual for a film to show. They really wanted to give us folks at home the idea that you're watching something in real time. And I had to take a story out of the book that is a little too adult about one guest star, what happened to him during one show because he didn't have enough time to do what he needed to do. Lucy Arnaz asked me to remove it because she felt any book associated with Lucille Ball would have children reading it back when this book first came out in the late 90s. And I took it out at her request. I'll probably put it back in for the new book, but it may be a little too adult for your listeners as well.
I don't know. I've got listeners from all walks, so. But
are 4-letter words allowed on your show, sir?
I've had them said on my show before.
Then I'll tell the story.
Sure.
There's a very famous I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and Ricky have first come to Hollywood. It's called L.A. at Last. And Lucy and Fred and Ethel go to the Brown Derby restaurant to look for celebrities. And the man sitting in the next booth is Bill Holden. It's the episode where she lights her nose on fire. For those of you who have watched it, it's also one of the great big fan favorites. Now, there was a problem because Miss Ball wanted this to go quickly. At the end of the scene in the Brown Derby restaurant, Bill Holden is hit with a pie. Well, he appears in the next scene. So one of the associate producers or associate directors gets a production assistant, a male production assistant, and says, look, William Asher is the director. When he yells cut at the end of that scene, you grab Holden by the wrist, you drag him to his dressing room, strip off his clothes, throw him in the shower, get all the pie and goop off of him, towel him off, get him into his next costume, and drag him back to the set. The makeup man will meet you on the set to fix his makeup. Miss Ball does not want the audience to get cold because there's another huge big comedy scene coming right afterwards. And you have 12 minutes because Miss Ball herself walked through this to see how long it would take. So we're putting you in charge of this. You have 12 minutes. Yes, sir. They're filming the show. They have the scene in the Brown Derby. Lucy Ricardo gets pie all over William Holden. Cut. The production assistant grabs Mr. Holden by the wrist and disappears. 12 minutes goes by. 24 minutes goes by. 32 minutes goes by. Finally, and by this point, Lucille is chain smoking, pacing back and forth, furious, and Mr. Arnaz is telling her dirty jokes to keep her calm. Finally, Mr. Holden appears. The makeup man, Hal King, fixes his makeup, and they go on with the show, and it was very successful. It's one of the classic episodes I didn't mention before, but fans just love it. Well, after the show was finished filming, the assistant director grabs that production assistant by his lapels because he was wearing a sports jacket and says, what the hell happened? I told you 12 minutes. And the production assistant said, I did what you told me to do. Bill Asher yelled, cut. I grabbed Holden by the wrist. I dragged him to his dressing room. I tore off his clothes. I threw him in the shower. I got the goop and the stuff all off of him. I pulled him out. I toweled him off. He got an erection. And I took care of it. So Miss Ball was kept waiting for half an hour while Bill Holden got a Hummer from a production assistant. That's the story.
Okay.
And in case any of you are asking, am I implying that Mr. Holden was gay? No, I'm not implying that at all. I want you to think about Adrenaline.
Okay.
Mr. Holden had started off on Broadway, but he had not been before a live audience at this point in over a decade. And the adrenaline rush of, you have no idea the ovation he got when the audience realized he was the guest star. I just think his whole body was on alert. And once he was excited, the only thing to do was to get rid of the excitement so he could go on with his work. But I honestly believe that's about the only time in the original 180 episodes where they stopped the show that long.
Wow. No, and William Holden was quite a big movie star, too.
Oh, yeah.
I
And
mean,
they made a film together called Miss Grant Takes Richmond, so they'd known each other quite a while at this point.
yes, he was also in Sunset Boulevard, one of the all-time great masterpieces.
Absolutely. Miss Grant Takes Richmond is another sort of slapstick comedy, scatterbrain, scheming. The woman she plays in that film is related, at least in writing, to what eventually became Lucy Ricardo. It is a slapstick comedy film and slightly romantic comedy. And it was very, very popular. But that was probably 8 years before this I Love Lucy episode was made. And the production assistant wasn't fired. He kept on. But he told me the story. So, and so did her camera coordinator. So I had this story told by more than one person. And they wanted to emphasize that it had nothing to do with Holden being anything other than who he was and just all jacked up on adrenaline in front of a live audience.
Yeah, I get that, yeah. But, yeah, and you had mentioned also she had done MAME as well, and I think that might have been the second to last movie I think she had done.
It was the last theatrical film she made.
Okay.
She made one more TV movie.
Oh, that's right.
About a bag lady.
Okay.
But the last film you could see in theaters was MAME.
Okay. And you said that was one of the movies that she also really liked as well.
Lucille Ball, in her youth, was inspired by vaudeville. Canada had vaudeville longer than the United States did, and Europe still has it. Vaudeville was going to a theater, and you saw one juggler, ice skater, dance team, singer, comedian, sketch artist after another. The biggest stars appeared right before intermission and right towards the end of the show. People like Al Jolson and Fanny Bryce, Eddie Cantor, and George Jessel, and Burns and Allen, and Jack Benny were all big vaudeville stars. And this is what Miss Ball saw up in Celeron, New York, where she was growing up. And when she got to New York City, vaudeville was still a big deal. That's pretty much what she'd wanted to go into. She wanted to be a funny, singing, dancing person in vaudeville. Being in a legitimate play or being in a film never occurred to her. So she was inspired by these vaudevillians. And I think I Love Lucy, all the way through it, has a sort of vaudeville feel to it. Ricky's nightclub scenes, him singing and dancing. William Frawley, who played Fred, was a vaudeville star who introduced the song Melancholy Baby. Vivian Vance had not only been on vaudeville, but she was Ethel Merman's understudy in 2 Broadway musicals and became a Broadway star of her own. So the show used the talents all these people had. MAME was the biggest. MAME was this huge, glossy, spectacular musical comedy. Unfortunately, at the time Miss Ball did it, her voice had deepened, and she could not sing very well. And just before filming started, she was in a skiing accident in Colorado and severely broke her leg, which impeded the amount of dancing she could do. There were people at the time who said she was too old, she couldn't sing, she couldn't dance. And the film was not a flop, but it was not the spectacular hit it probably could have become. In recent years, I have been working as an entertainer on cruise ships, and I'll have a Lucille Ball Film Festival, and I'll play name for the audience, and then take questions afterwards. And without any doubts, everybody who sees it says the same thing. I don't like the opening number, but everything after that is wonderful. Why don't they make more movies like this anymore? So I think in retrospect, it has become a cult hit.
Yep. Yeah, okay. I was going to ask about some of the other people in the movie. I was just looking at some notes on her, and I did not realize how long she and Desi were married. They were married for 20 years.
Almost 19 and a half years.
Yeah, 19 and a half years. And of course, he played Ricky Ricardo. Also had that everybody remembers that laugh. That
was his real laugh, because Desi Jr. laughs the same way but faster. So that was really how he laughed. Desi, we could do 2 hours on Desi alone. By the time he and Miss Ball met, Desi had become a Broadway star. He was starring in a Rodgers and Hart musical called Too Many Girls, and they wanted to make a movie out of it. And RKO bought the rights to the musical, and they brought just Desi and one of the chorus boys out from the East to play the parts. The chorus boy was Van Johnson, and they filled the movie in with Ann Miller and Francis Langford and I believe Eddie Quillen. And Desi played his part. Other people played the male leads besides him. And the woman who played the lead, the female lead on Broadway, her husband didn't want her leaving to go west. So RKO filled in with one of their contract stars. So Lucille Ball played the part. Miss Ball had never seen Mr. Arnaz before. Mr. Arnaz had never seen Miss Ball before. And Lucille was, by the way, I call her Miss Ball and Lucille on purpose.
Okay.
Because if I say Lucy, you all are going to think Lucy Ricardo. And I'm trying to separate the actress from the character. Miss Ball was making a film called Dance Girl Dance with Maureen O'Hara, which was also a musical. And the scene they were shooting that day was I hate this term, it's so sexist, a cat fight, a fight between the two leading ladies. And she was made up to be all bruised and black and blue and her costume torn. And they stopped for lunch, and Miss Ball went to the commissary to eat lunch. And there was Mr. Arnaz, and the director pointed out to her, oh, that's going to be your leading lady. And he couldn't believe that anyone who looked that badly would play the beautiful girl. Well, then he saw her the next day properly made up. And he claimed he fell in love with her instantly. In fact, there's a scene in the film where he sees her for the first time and just faints over from her beauty. And he would say, that's pretty much how it was in real life, too. They made this film together, and they were married less than a year later.
Yeah. And you also had Vivian Vance and, of course, William Frawley playing, of course, Fred and Ethel, the neighbors / landlords. Of course, William Frawley was before my time. I think he was the only member of the cast that died before I was born.
William Frawley was before everybody's time. William Frawley was a vaudeville star in the 19 teens as a young man. So he had much, much more show business experience than anybody else who worked on the show. They were very hard parts to cast. Lucille Ball had that show, My Favorite Husband, I told you about. Mm-hmm. And a nice, good-looking blonde actor named Richard Denning played her husband. He was in films. He was on television. He was not a huge star, but he was the star, the male lead of the show. Bea Benaderet, who was Kate Bradley on Petticoat Junction, the voice of Betty Rubble on the Flintstones, and spent 8 seasons as Gracie Allen's best friend on the Burns and Allen show, played Lucy's best friend on the radio show. Gail Gordon played the secondary male lead on the radio show. when they were transferring it to television, CBS wanted Gail Gordon and B. Bennett Derrick to play Fred and Ethel, parts that had not been in the original pilot. There was no Fred and Ethel in the original pilot. Problem was that by the time they got around to I Love Lucy, B. Bennett Derrick was already doing the Burns and Allen show live every other week. So there was no way that she could play both parts. Gail Gordon, who, for those of you who don't understand what radio was like, no one memorized their lines. Everything was read from a script. So it was possible for the same actor to be on 4 or 5 different shows a day playing different parts and do that every single day of the week. Radio actors made fortunes. They said it was like stealing. And Gail Gordon was making huge money as a radio actor and would not play the part for the about $250 a week they were offering in the beginning. Both Fred and Ethel got paid a whole lot more money towards the end. So he turned the part down because of the money. They were stuck. Bill Frawley was the one who brought himself to the part. He called Desi Arnaz and said, I hear you're casting this part. It's perfect for me. Why aren't you thinking about me? Why haven't I been contacted? Why haven't you called my agent? And Desi told him the truth. You're older than we thought Fred would be, and you have an alcohol problem. And we can't, we just simply cannot trust or risk you screwing up, because this is our money and this is our future. And they made a deal. If Bill ever showed up to work drunk, he'd be written out of that week's show. If he showed up to work twice drunk, Desi would have him blackballed from the industry. And Bill said, okay, here's my end of the deal. Any year the Yankees are in the World Series, you have to fly me to New York first class, put me up in a suite, and get me tickets to the World Series. And Desi agreed. And every year, I Love Lucy was on. The Yankees were in the World Series, and Desi had to fly Bill Frawley back. He never, ever showed up drunk, never allowed his drinking to interfere with his performances on the show. He did a wonderful job as Fred Mertz, but basically Bill Frawley was playing himself, an older curmudgeon who was near of a dollar and flirtatious with young girls, and didn't like people all that much, was fond of the Arnazes, was bigoted. He was who he was. And he and Miss Vance did not get along at all.
Oh.
And they wrote that into the script. They wrote the antipathy between the two actors into the script. Everybody understood after about 10 episodes were aired that they had this huge hit on their hands. And they had to learn to love one another because they were going to do 39 episodes a year for however many years this was going to go on. I Love Lucy could have gone on for 15 or 20 years if the Arnazes had wanted it to. They're the ones who chose to end it after 6 seasons, 180 episodes.
Why end it there?
The honest and unhappy answers are that Miss Ball and Mr. Arnaz's marriage wasn't doing too well. Miss Ball was aging. She had 2 small children at home she barely saw. She wanted to fix her marriage. She wanted to spend more time with her children. She was getting tired. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work to shoot a show. Remember, think about this. All those wonderful episodes, folks, that we love and watch over and over again, they saw the scripts Monday morning at 10, and for most of the show's history, Thursday evening at 7, they were filming it. 4 days. All of that work had to happen in 4 days. Everybody was tired.
Yeah.
And Desilu Studios was becoming a major Hollywood thing, a corporation. Mr. Arnaz was needed as the head of the studio to do studio work and not play Ricky Ricardo. He couldn't do that every week anymore and run the studio. It just became personally uncomfortable for them to keep playing those characters week after week. Vivian and Bill really disliked one another, were happy to be cut apart, and they did 13 more shows in an hour-long format where they weren't working every week. And that gave everybody income without having to work every single week. So I said this show could have kept going, but I don't know that they could have kept up the quality.
Yeah,
I think after a while, they would have had to have begun repeating jokes and bits and storylines. And they were wise. They went out while everything was still fresh and crisp. There is not one episode of I Love Lucy that isn't good. Most of them are excellent, but the lowest quality was only good. There are almost no other television shows that can say that in the history of television. Miss Ball went on to do the Lucy show without Mr. Arnaz, and it was very funny and very well received and in the top 10, and Miss Ball won 2 more Emmy Awards for that. She did 6 more seasons of Here's Lucy with her own children. The quality wasn't as good because different writers, different directors, and Miss Ball is, 20 years older now, and in her 60s, in her late 50s, and as someone who's in his late 50s, I watched the shows she made in her 50s, and I marvel both at the physical shape she kept herself in and how much physical comedy she could still do. It's amazing to me that she didn't end up in the hospital every week.
And it must
that's real discipline. That woman had tremendous discipline in her work.
And it must be noted too it was the most watched show for 4 out of its 6 seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the top 10. Actually, I will even amend that. In the top 5 until the last 2 seasons of Here's Lucy, for something like 21 seasons, a Lucille Ball program was in the top 5 of the ratings. That's a long time to be at the top.
Yep. So I was told today when I mentioned to somebody today that I was going to be interviewing you, and where I was going to talk about Lucille Ball, and we got talking about I Love Lucy, and he had mentioned, of course, he said that Desi Arnaz was not a good musician in reality.
Well, I guess one has to define musician. Mr. Arnaz did not play an instrument. The only instrument he played was the conga drum. Mr. Arnaz led an orchestra. He was the front man. He led the band, and he sang. God, now we have to explain to folks about orchestras. In the 1930s and 40s and 50s, orchestra music was the pop music of the day. And there were dozens of these orchestras, mostly led by men. The leader had a personality. Some of them, like Len Miller or Tommy Dorsey, actually played an instrument. Others, like Ozzie Nelson, just led the band and was charming and handsome. Desi kind of sort of fell into the latter in that he was enormously handsome, enormously charming. Desi precedes, and I'll use 2 singers most of you have known, Tom Jones and Elvis Presley.
Okay.
In that Desi was a sex symbol singer. The girls swooned for him, and when he sang his Latin rhythms, he would swivel his hips. Before Elvis did it, before Tom Jones did it, and it received the same kind of attention from women that those gentlemen got in their day. He's not given enough credit for that. So he really was a sex symbol. He sang. Was he a great singer? No, he was a personality singer. Jimmy Durante wasn't a great singer either, but his albums sold millions. Desi was a tremendous showman. He knew how to make an audience happy. If you came to see Desi Arnaz perform anywhere, anytime, you had a good time. And if his singing wasn't great, if his conga drum playing, I've never known anyone who played the conga drum better than he did. Certainly his son was a better drummer. He wasn't a musician. He was a performer. He was an
I just
entertainer.
know somebody had mentioned that today, but I wouldn't know anything about that. So that's why I bring that up. So
That's
it's
why
not
that's
not
why
a
I'm telling you. The
yeah,
same way Maurice Chevalier.
yeah.
Those of you who remember Mr. Chevalier, he wasn't a great singer, but people loved to watch him sing. And Mr. Arnaz patterned himself after Mr. Chevalier. The straw hat, the tuxedos, the bow ties. He romanced the women in the audience in such a way that they got excited by it, but the men didn't resent him for it. And that's a very difficult line to walk, and he did it brilliantly. He did everything brilliantly. He was a brilliant human being. He was very, very intelligent, and came from a wonderful family in Cuba. And unfortunately, the Batista Revolution banished them from their home country. And he came here literally with nothing and made himself into the owner of the world's biggest studio. I'd say he did pretty well. But yes, if we're talking about, let's name some great musicians of the 20th century, Mr. Arnaz would not be on the list.
Yeah, that's not criticism on my part. I certainly do believe that he definitely brought charm, he brought charisma, and he definitely brought comic appeal that he definitely brought in spades. But I was going to ask, you had mentioned earlier about Lucille Ball. I don't want to get into anything real personal, but I was wondering what you could share with us about her, what that you would have known about her. I'm trying to think how to word this. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think if you were to ask Miss Ball about herself, she didn't think she was a good singer. She didn't think she was a good actress, particularly. She didn't think she was a good dancer, particularly. She felt ambition was the hallmark of her life. She felt that her children were the hallmark of her life. She would often say, she was 40 years old before she had Lucy Arnaz. And or just about 40, a couple of weeks shy of 39 to 40. And said, my life did not begin until I had children. Now, did that make her the greatest mother in the whole world? No. Because when one has driving ambition, that's where one's energy goes to. So she tried very hard to juggle an extraordinarily demanding career with raising what she hoped would be two fine children. I like Lucy Arnaz and Desi Jr. immensely. I think as persons and as humans, they're lovely, lovely people. They have problems like everybody else does, as did Miss Ball. I think her failure, as she saw it, these are her words, in her marriage to Mr. Arnaz, kind of haunted her. I don't know, this is a guess, and maybe the most personal thing I've ever said, if she hadn't been such a huge star at the time they divorced and there hadn't been so much publicity about it, I wonder if she would have married her second husband quite so quickly. Because she got divorced in April of 1960 and remarried in November of 61. I don't know if maybe had she waited, she might have married a little differently. Once she married Mr. Morton, who I personally did not like, she was almost beholden to make that marriage look like it was perfect, because she did not want to have, two strikes on her record, two mistakes. I don't know that marriage was as happy as she liked the public to think it was. Certainly towards the end of it, I don't think it was as happy as she would have liked it to have been. So I think she was extraordinarily grateful for her success and the financial rewards from it, and the love she got from audiences. Personally, I think she was as happy or unhappy as most of us are. She had loving years and years where she wasn't loved, and years where things were going well personally, and years where she was very unhappy with herself, with her husbands, with her children, things come up. So I don't know that there is anything about her personal life that is extraordinary other than the ambition. The ambition and talent were extraordinary. But in her married life, dating life, child-rearing life, being a grandma life, I think you could talk to almost any of your listeners who are over the age of 18 and have had time to have families and have love affairs and have children, well, you wouldn't hear very similar stories. So it's not that she was perfect and not that there's nothing to tell, but what I would tell would be like, your Aunt Sally's marriage, or your Uncle Jason's marriage, or those, your cousins who didn't get along with their mother, or it's what families are like. And her mistakes, her heartbreaks were done in front of 200 million people. Every time anything happened, it was in all the papers and all the magazines. They don't have those kind of magazines very much anymore. But in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, there were a dozen or so magazines about television stars and movie stars saying the most outrageous things about them.
Yeah.
That weren't true. But if anything was true, they'd make it 37 times worse than it actually was. And I think Miss Ball was on the cover of every magazine every month for years because they'd find something, because Lucille Ball sold magazines. And I don't know, those of you listening to my voice right now, how many of you would enjoy reading about your personal life, whether it was true or not, every single day? Having your children go to school and have their schoolmates, hey, I read in the magazine that it says that your daddy, blah, blah, blah. I don't know that I would enjoy that. I've never become famous enough to have it in my face every day. I've enjoyed a very small measure of fame for which I am so grateful I can't even put it into the words. I'm a big ham. I love being recognized. But I have to be careful. At my small little level in show business, I have to be careful in public to look right and to make sure that there isn't a photographer or a writer nearby who's going to write something or print a picture of me that looks awful to sell papers. So if I have that on this teeny tiny level, I can only imagine when you're the biggest star in the world, what you have to deal with every day. So I know that part of it was not happy for Miss Ball. Mr. Arnaz, after the divorce, pretty much kept a very low profile. He produced a few things. He wrote a book, his own autobiography called A Book, and publicized it. But he appeared in public very infrequently and chose to keep his personal life as private as possible. Miss Ball continued to be a huge star until the day she died. I mean, I don't know if those of you who remember where you were in April of 1989, but when Miss Ball died, North America stopped. Canada, United States, and Mexico, when her death was announced in Los Angeles, which has the busiest freeways in the world, people literally stopped their cars on the freeway, shocked that Lucille Ball was actually dead, and cried until people realized they were on a busy freeway and had to keep going.
I would have been in high school. She was. I would have been in high school. Yep. Where were you when you heard the news?
I was at home. I was living in Los Angeles, and I got a call before it was released to the press because I was already in show business, and was told, look, before you find out anywhere else, she did not survive the heart surgery she did. She died early this morning. And quite frankly, I spent the entire day crying. When I say America, I mean North America. In English-speaking North America and Mexico, where it was dubbed into Spanish, Lucille Ball's shows, all 4 of the series she did, were like comfort food. They were like Oreo cookies.
Yep. You
could go watch them, and you knew that for 30 minutes, you would be in a world where people loved each other. A happy ending was enjoyed. by everybody involved, and you would laugh and completely forget whatever your troubles were. And you could count on it, because with I Love Lucy, The Lucy Show, and Here's Lucy, and the hour-long specials, it was on every single day, morning, noon, and night, into the 80s, until the time she died, and then was revived on Nick at Night and cable stations to this day. When she was gone, people really felt like she'd be there forever, that she was just a member of the family that was always going to be there for them. And that's how she was treated, like a member of the family, because we took her into our homes. We took her into our homes more often than we took our own relatives into our homes.
Yeah.
She was such a huge presence in our lives, in Canada, in England, in Australia, in the United States. I think the show was dubbed in 23 languages. In Japan, in Italy, in France. Other than the communist bloc countries, when the Soviet Union was still around, they didn't like I Love Lucy because it showed the woman having the upper hand.
Oh,
and that went against what they were teaching.
Wow.
So countries where that was the culture, also the Middle East did not like I Love Lucy for the same reason, because she was a woman who didn't keep her place.
Their loss.
Well, times have changed since then. But
Yeah.
Lucy Ricardo, the character, was a feminist who fully did not understand why she couldn't be as successful as Ricky was. Why was she stuck in the house cleaning and cooking? She thought she was talented. She wanted a career. She wanted to be out in the world achieving things. That was almost unheard of for any female character in a comedy. You saw it in Betty Davis films and Joan Crawford films and Barbara Stanwyck films, the women executives and the rich, wealthy, powerful women. But in comedy and on sitcoms on television, you almost never saw that. Women who were looking to work, you went, oh, poor things, they can't find a man. Lucy Ricardo had her man, but she wanted a life too. Very, very rare. I think it inspired a lot of women.
Yeah. Another interesting thing too is that CBS was a little nervous about Lucy and Desi, and the fact that he was Cuban and she was American.
They were nervous about a lot of things they did. Back in 1951, folks, believe it or not, the CBS television network thought that a woman of European background being married to a Cuban was considered a mixed marriage. And they didn't think this country would accept a mixed marriage, racially mixed marriage. And Lucille and Desi had written for them a stage show that they took to theaters before they made the pilot, to prove that the audiences live would accept them as a couple. And as Miss Ball often said, it isn't like we weren't already married for 11 years and the whole world knew about it anyway. It wasn't a surprise that she was married to a Cuban. Mm-hmm. And the idea that CBS thought that a marriage from a white girl to a Latino is mixed. Hopefully today we don't even think about mixed. You think about love, and you marry who you love, and it doesn't matter what their ethnic background is. But in 1951, it was a big deal, and they had to prove it to the network. They didn't want Desi at all. And they had this terrific first season of I Love Lucy, and then Lucille Ball gets pregnant with her second child. And now they had another problem, because you couldn't say the word pregnant on television. You couldn't infer that anyone actually had sex.
That is so ridiculous.
How do we present a pregnancy when you can't use the word and you can't infer that these two people were intimate together? Well, a lot has been written about beds on television. Some people claim that Bewitched was the first TV series where the husband and wife slept in the same bed together. That's not true. Ozzie and Harriet did it before Darren and Samantha, but Lucy and Ricky did it before anybody. Their bedroom at 623 East 68th Street had two single beds pushed together into one great big California king bed, and they slept in the same bed together. When they had the episode where she finds out she's pregnant, the beds got separated so that you couldn't possibly imagine how she got that way. Because everybody knows if you put a foot of space between two beds, nobody has sex. And they couldn't use the word pregnant. They said she was in a family way, an expectant mother, expecting, infanticipating. They brought in a priest, a rabbi, and a minister to vet every script they wrote to make sure it was clean, healthy, wholesome look at a woman being a mother. And nothing was ever written by her brilliant genius, and let me say their names for you all. Jess Oppenheimer, who created the show, was the head writer and the producer, and Madeline Pugh and Bob Carroll Jr., the three of them wrote every single script for 39 weeks, the first 4 seasons of the show. And my friends Bob Schiller and Bob Carroll Jr., Bob Weisskopf, came on for the last 2 seasons and joined the Lucy staff. Brilliant, brilliant writing. William Asher was the director for most of the I Love Lucy episodes, certainly for the pregnancy ones, and handled the direction with delicate care and whimsy and warmth. I think that word warmth, the script had it, the director had it, and Miss Ball, Mr. Arnaz, Miss Vance, and Mr. Frawley all knew how to project warmth, so that whatever the characters' peccadillos were, you loved them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on the air now talking about a show that debuted, almost 70 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, that was debuted just, let me see, would have been... Yeah, that was 1951. That would have been, my father would have been 5 years old. My mom would have been 4.
My parents were in high school, and watched it. Everybody watched it. It was a must-see TV kind of thing in those days. There was nothing else like it on television. It stood alone and apart by itself. There were many imitators: Our Miss Brooks, My Little Margie, I Married Joan. Some of them were actually good, especially Our Miss Brooks, but none of them reached the success of this show. Mr. Arnaz always said all the credit went to Lucille Ball. I disagree. Yes, she was the centerpiece of this. But had they not had Carl Freund be their cinematographer, this is the man who was a cinematographer for Metropolis. This is the man who invented,
that's a great movie.
Who invented every kind of lighting and camera angle you could possibly imagine, working for what is called scale, the lowest amount of money by union that you're allowed to get paid. These brilliant young writers, Bill Asher, this incredible director, the camera coordinator, Maury Thompson, who made sure that every angle was just right, that the cameras were always in focus. An incredible man named Hal King, who did all of their makeup, did Miss Ball's makeup and everything she did up until 1972 or 3, made them look young and healthy when perhaps they weren't. Her costuming was excellent. Everything, every area, the coffee in the coffee machine, the percolator, was excellent coffee. Everything they did, and I'm not joking, everything had to be excellent. Both Jess Oppenheimer as producer, Mr. Arnaz as executive producer and one of the stars of the show, Miss Ball, insisted that everything be done absolutely the best possible product possible. They insisted upon it, and they worked incredible long 14, 16-hour days to ensure that when we turned on CBS Monday nights at 9, we would watch an excellent, excellent show.
And that indeed happened. I got to say, you mentioned the pregnancy bit. It's funny because I wasn't around, of course, back then, but I got to say, the way the censors acted back then, I got to say, like, I see stuff that's on TV today that probably shouldn't be there. But stuff like that, I gotta say, where do they think kids come from? Like, I mean, I'm not saying they have to show it, but the fact that they would try, like, something like the word pregnancy would be a problem, or something like that, I think that is so ridiculous. And the priest would have to come on and look at the script. I'd like, yeah. I'm glad I wasn't directing. I would probably kick them off the set.
You have to remember the time this took place.
Yeah.
Our country was a very different place post-World War II. We'd been through something that people thought maybe we weren't going to live through. And we watched millions of people getting annihilated. And our country became very conservative. And just like the 1920s after World War I, and just like the 1970s after Vietnam, after Korea, or during Korea early on, and after World War II, our countries, and I include Canada and America together in this, kind of closed our eyes to the real world. Like, we need to heal for a while. Let's not have any reality. Let's just keep it really light and have fun. And the different arts, other than Broadway. Broadway was always adult, but the films and radio and television kept things from being sexual, violent, too much of anything. They kept it on a fantasy level almost. And then after a while, we get back to real life. So in 1951, that's how the country was. The dirtiest thing, it's funny, we're thinking about being dirty. Can I say dirty words on the air?
Go ahead.
The dirtiest thing Miss Ball ever said on the air, other than saying hell or damn once in a while on a talk show, was she and Desi were feted on the Ed Sullivan Show. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Ed Sullivan was a sports writer and a Broadway columnist who had a television show from 1948 to 1972.
Very famous for interviewing the Beatles.
Hour-long variety show,
Yep.
And on Sunday nights, that's what you watched.
Yeah.
And I know he played in Canada, so those of you watching, I know he was up there almost from the beginning.
He was famous for interviewing the Beatles as well. That movie, I Want to Hold Your Hand, played around with that.
Yeah, he was the first person to present them on American television.
Yeah.
But he had an evening. One of his hour-long shows was a salute to Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And towards the end of the evening, they had a little round-table discussion about the Arnazes. And Miss Ball got up to speak about Desi and wanted to give him credit and said, you all just don't know what an incredible producer he is. And she took a beat and she says, and I've got two little Arnazes at home to prove it. That's about the dirtiest she ever got.
And we're talking 1951 when that came out. That was also the same year that A Streetcar Named Desire came out too, and that pushed the envelope a little bit as well. So,
and yet the stage play was more sexual and more violent than the film. They had to water the film down to get it out there.
Yeah. And
we're talking about a time when The Moon is Blue came out, and it was banned in Boston because they used the word virgin.
Yeah.
Because if you have a virgin, then you're implying that, A, she will have sex in the future, and that there are other people who aren't virgins. And that was, oh my goodness gracious, that's so dirty.
That is so funny to me.
Our culture has changed quite a bit.
Yeah. I still have bouts with people with that mindset even today, And I've had a few of them block me on social media because they force that kind of agenda. I grew up in a Christian household, and I was baptized, and I am a Christian, but I have a big problem with people that, and I think the censors have a place. I do, I really do, but I also think that there's times when some of these, especially some of these people, have an agenda where they're making decisions for other people that might not want those decisions made for them. And that is where I start having an issue with such people.
I think in the arts, and this has been said so many times, it's almost become trite. If you don't like a television show, there's 500 channels. Change the channels or turn your television off and read a book. You pick up the book, you think it's too Jewish, too anti-Christian, too against whoever you are, put the book down and knit. We have choices in life. No one's forcing you to see the film or see the stage show or read the book or have the conversation. No one's forcing you to do that. We all have choices. And I think common sense should rule. Yes, if all media just became pornography, I'd have a huge problem with that. First of all, I wouldn't be entertained, and we'd be, wiped out of civilization because we'd be really, really stupid as a people.
Yep.
But am I going to stop somebody else from producing or being in or watching pornography? No. I think glamorizing violence is terrible. I won't go to see products filled with violence, but I won't stop you from watching them. You grew up in a Christian household. I grew up in a Jewish household. I have a dear friend who's a Muslim. I have another friend who's a Buddhist, and many friends who are either atheist or agnostic. What do we need to do to get along? Have mutual respect. I don't shove my beliefs down their throats. They don't shove theirs down mine. I come from a Jewish family, but we intermarried with Italian Catholics and Irish Catholics and Protestants. What do? They come to our bar mitzvahs and brises. We go to their baptisms and christenings, and we dance and we sing and we have fun together, and we each respect the other. I don't believe in censorship at all.
I'll give you an example what I'm talking about too. I had somebody once. I really enjoyed David Fincher's version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which was quite a brutal film, but I enjoyed it. And I had somebody tell me every copy should be burned because of the 2 rape scenes in it. Well, one day I was at the theater and I caught him coming out of The Amazing Spider-Man. And when he came over to me, I pointed at the theater and I said, "So you're okay with the violence in that?" And I know what he was going to say. Well, there's no blood. And I say, yes, but if I hit you, I could still be arrested. I can't say, well, there's no blood drawn. Doesn't make a difference. I still assaulted you. So I said, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll go one step farther with that line of thinking. I'm more afraid of the violence in Spider-Man than I am in the other film, because the other film shows the violence as it actually is, with all the gore and all the sadness and all the hurt. When we show violence where it's like a cartoon, then young people get the idea that that's what violence is. It's okay to be violent. You just sort of shake your head and get up and move on with your life. You don't actually get broken bones or get killed or hurt people. And I don't like glamorizing violence. I don't like glamorizing sex either.
Nope.
Show it as it is, and you either enjoy it or you don't. I think there's room, and I believe, since we're talking about Lucille Ball, I've seen her on talk shows where she discussed these topics. She was conservative about these things. She didn't believe that mainstream actors and actresses should do nude scenes. She didn't like the violence. She didn't like the dirty language. But I don't think she would ever have stopped anyone from making them or watching them. she felt, this is not my cup of tea. This is not my bag. I won't do them. And I won't, support them. But if you want to do it, that's your business.
And again,
she wasn't Catholic. Her husband was Catholic. She brought up her kids Catholic. Her second husband was Jewish. She had pastrami and chopped liver in the house. It didn't matter. Just the respect.
And again, mentioning sex, I did like 9.5 Weeks. I wasn't a big fan of 50 Shades of Grey. I think, and I still would say both films are very, very different based on the position the characters are in. But again, the censorship issue, yeah, that was a big problem. Like I've mentioned before, back in 1971, Clockwork Orange, Dirty Harry, and Straw Dogs were all banned in so many places. 30 years later, Freddy Got Fingered got an R rating when it should have been an NC-17 or X rating right on the spot, and yet it played everywhere. How? I don't know. And it was just grotesque.
There were people in the 1960s who protested Bewitched, which was this incredibly innocent sitcom, because the characters in it were witches. Therefore, they were of Satan. Therefore, they are anti-Christian. Therefore, they should not be on the air.
And yet it was a good, entertaining sitcom.
There's, if someone is looking for a reason to hate something, if you look hard enough, you can find it.
Yeah.
I think both Miss Ball and Mr. Arnaz are people who minded their own businesses and did not judge what other people did. They had each their own morality, each their own set of beliefs, and they were different one from the other. Mr. Arnaz and Miss Ball were not on the same page about all these things, but they respected it in each other and in other people. And I believe they both had a lot of gay friends, a lot of Jewish friends, a lot of liberal friends, a lot of very conservative friends. They entertained Republican presidents, they entertained Democratic presidents, and they were honored by both. They didn't choose the people in their lives because everything about them was just like them. They chose people for their talents, for their intellect, for their heart, for the kind of people they were. And I think if we all did that and used good common sense and respect, how much nicer this world would be. Many, many years ago, my friend Steve Allen, who was on American television for 30 years, and the original Tonight Show host, wrote a book called Dump, D-U-M-B-T-H, The Dumbing Down of America.
Okay.
And he included Canada in this. This is not just the United States. And talked about where our society was headed. He wrote this around 1990, 1991. Everything he said has come true. The lack of respect for education, the lack of respect for the arts, the lack of respect between religions, the lack of respect between races, using people different from yourself as scapegoats to get what you want, greed. It's all happening. It's all happening right in front of our eyes. I think, unfortunately, the world in which I Love Lucy existed, and I know we're getting close to the end of our time together here, doesn't exist. Perhaps that's why baby boomers especially love I Love Lucy so much, because you watch the episodes, underneath all of it, these four people love one another, despite fighting among themselves, always have each other's backs, respect each other, are thoughtful of one another, except when the plot calls for them not to be. But in the bigger picture, they're polite, they speak proper English, they dress nicely. They always imply that they're treating other people nicely, with respect. And it's a world that hardly exists anymore, even in our small towns, whether you're in Saskatchewan or Brooklyn or Kansas or New Brunswick or Ontario or Toronto or small towns I've never been to in Canada. I've spent quite a bit of time in Canada. So
have you been my way?
I'm naming the places I've been before. But
You've been to New Brunswick here?
I have, sir.
Oh,
In show
wow.
business, you end up traveling everywhere.
Have you've been to Fredericton?
No, sir. No, not that. Like I said, the real small towns, I have not had the opportunity to see the beauty of the places like that in Canada. And my lungs aren't what they used to be. So going to some of the colder places are also, I've avoided the really, really, really cold, snowy places. So I've not seen the Great White North. I understand it is magnificently beautiful. I've just never had a chance to go. But I believe Canada, maybe more so these days, the United States, still reflects and has those basic values of respect.
Yeah.
And I admire the man who runs your country tremendously.
Pierre Trudeau, yeah.
I will not speak about American politics because we're not in America. We're in Canada now, and what I think doesn't matter anyway. But I will tell you again that the cast, Miss Ball, was as thrilled to entertain President Roosevelt and President Truman as she was President Eisenhower and President Kennedy and President Johnson and President Nixon. She was in the White House with all of them, and President Ford and President Reagan and President Carter. President Carter's mother was on one of her specials.
Okay.
Each was a thrill, an equal thrill for her, because she respected the office of the presidency. And it wasn't about which party was in power, it was about respect.
A show like I Love Lucy probably couldn't be made today, could it?
You know, she was asked that question on a talk show in the 80s. Could they make the show then? She said no, and Otto Preminger was one of the other guests. It was Irv Kupcinet show, Cup show, and Otto Preminger said, Lucille, if your show was made then, if it was made today, if it was made 20 years from now, it was so well made that it would still be a hit. They would have to culturally change the references and some of the relationships because the world has changed. So you would need those people in that place, at that studio, working together to make the show. You can't cookie cutter it. But I think if you could magically twitch your nose like Samantha and bring all those wonderful creative people either to Hollywood or to Toronto or where you are and reconstruct it, it could be done and be just as funny. But it needs those people. I'm asked all the time, how come the Lucy show and Here's Lucy, although funny, weren't as good as I Love Lucy? Why did the quality go down, or why is it perceived to be not as funny? And the answer I always give is her original writers left her. Her original directors left her. Carl Freund passed away. Desi and she got divorced. Bill Frawley left the show. The elements, it's like saying, this is the most delicious cake I've ever eaten in my life. Let's change 12 of the ingredients and then wonder why the cake doesn't taste the same. Lucille Ball wasn't the only element. Perhaps she was the best element, but she wasn't the only one. And you take away so much of what's there, everything is not interchangeable. The people who stayed on television for many, many, many years, Red Skelton, Jackie Gleason, year in, year out, had very similar writers, very similar directors. Their shows were very similar from season to season. Even Ed Sullivan only had 2 producers in 20-something seasons. But when you change the creative people behind the scenes, what you see in the camera changes dramatically. And, and that was the answer. We talked almost at the beginning of our wonderful conversation, which, by the way, I've had my own radio show twice. I have never talked this much politics publicly ever anywhere else. So congratulations. You have a first for your 100th episode. But Ms. Ball's answer about why she didn't use her crying jags and that sound anymore, she said the writers changed and the people changed and I changed and I got too old as a woman to make a silly noise when I hurt someone or to cry because I don't get my way. And that's what happened. Lucille Ball, the person, got older, and the original creative team broke apart. And when you have that happen, it can't be the same.
Well, Geoffrey, I gotta say, this has been a wonderful, wonderful tribute to Lucille Ball. And what a great way to have my first 100, my 100th episode, talking about one of the all-time greats and pay tribute to her. And I hope, if she was alive today, that she would love this.
I sure hope so.
Yeah. And I hope that I did her justice, but I know you've done her justice. And I would love.
I think we both spoke from love, which is a wonderful thing.
Yes. And I got to say, I would love to eventually have you come back on here. I know you've done other TV shows and stuff I would love to talk to you about, and maybe sometime down the road. And maybe at some point down the road, I'll even have you on to do more Lucy talk, that I'm sure there's more stuff to discuss.
Well, I will tell you, sir, that first of all, you are a pleasure, and congratulations again on your 100th episode. I love Canada, and I love the opportunity to be heard by my Canadian friends and fans. And as often as you will have me, that's how often as I will appear with you.
And let's not forget, we love Lucy.
Always, always, always.
It was
never just a title.
Yes. Well, Geoffrey, thank you so much for taking time. And I especially want to thank Steve Joyner as well to hooking this up.
Who put this together for us. And thank you, Steve, for giving both of us so much pleasure for 2 hours.
Absolutely. Would you like to do a plug for my show before you head out?
I would. Just tell me what to say, and I will say it, because I've done literally, if not thousands, maybe thousands of radio shows through the years. I cannot remember enjoying any of them as much as this.
Oh, thank you so much. That was, oh man, that feels good to hear. Just state your name and say you've been listening to. My name's Greg Gilbert, and my show's called Python's Paradise, Python like the snake, and we're in New Brunswick, Canada.
This is Geoffrey Mark, author of the Lucy book, and I have had the pleasure to be on the 100th episode of Craig Gilbert's Python Paradise. Sure, Jeff. We'll do it again. This is Geoffrey Mark speaking, and I have had the pleasure of being on the 100th episode of Craig Gilbert's Python Paradise, coming to you from New Brunswick, Canada. Listen as often as you can.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. It's been a pleasure and an honor. You love Lucy, I love Lucy, and hopefully everybody else out there loves Lucy as well. There's 6 seasons worth of reasons to love Lucy.
You betcha.
God bless you, and we'll have you back again very, very soon.
God bless you and your listeners. I'll come back as soon as you have me.
Take it easy. You have yourself a wonderful evening.
Good night, folks.
Bye-bye.